Thank you for joining us tonight. The Pacific Division Feeding Capacity Building Series is brought to you by the Division Feeding Leadership. We'll be using the same Teams link for each session. Please double check your time zone before joining. My name is Yi Wei. I've been a volunteer with the Red Cross for 16 years. I'm a Master Chief and the Pacific Division co-lead with Mary. Several housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted tonight on our Pacific Division Red Cross YouTube channel. The link was included in the reminder email that was sent out earlier. The slide link was also included. If you're not able to view the live slides, please refer to the reminder email. I also want to remind everyone that the only approved generative AI tool for corporate-wide use at the Red Cross is Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat. And as part of our ongoing efforts to protect the Red Cross, we're enabling a CAPTCHA challenge to prevent unwanted web-based bots and unverified external participants from joining and recording Microsoft Teams meeting, effective March 30th. Your camera and mic have been disabled. We will not be using the chat functions. You have two options to get your questions answered. You can either enter your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand and we'll address your question at the end when time allows. Please also remember to enter your own hours on Volunteer Connection. Today, we'll be sharing with you a day in the life of a feeding responder. This is a very interactive session. We ask you to type your response in the Q&A when Anna asks you to. With that, Anna and Lisa, please take it away.
Hi. So I'm going to go off camera now, but I just wanted to say hello to everyone. I'm Anna Lane, and I am the Northern California Coastal Region co-lead for feeding. I'm also the feeding coordinator for Marin County, where I live. I've been a volunteer with the Red Cross for 8 years. I'm also working with the National Contact Center. That's the 1-800 Red Cross number. And wanted to take this time to give you an idea of what it's like to deploy in feeding, to give you an idea of what your daily life would be like. And in particular, this session is targeted to someone who has not yet deployed in feeding. So we will cover what your day would look like. We will then have Lisa come on. She's going to be partnering with me on this session, and she'll talk about what it's like on the ground because I'm often in headquarters. So she gives a really good perspective of that real life tips, etc. And then we will open it up to questions, but we also, as a little bit different in this session, we also want to hear from people who have deployed in feeding. And if you have a particular tip that would be useful, someone brand new to deploying and feeding, we'd love to hear from that. And before we start on the pages in the deck, I want to point out, look at the people on this front page. The Red Cross volunteers are happy because they're doing something that people like. People like to get food. So keep that in mind. This is actually a really wonderful way to engage with clients. Okay, next page. So this is basically what we're covering. I'm going to introduce Lisa in just a minute, but we're going to look at who's on the DRO feeding team, just a very high level of the TO so you understand what's going on and the other parts that you may not have access to. And then we'll go into a day in the life of that DRO feeding volunteer, whether you're working in a congregate shelter or non-congregate. Keep in mind that as you are deployed, things change really fast, and you might start in a shelter, but then you're going to be flipping over to non-congregate because the shelters are consolidating or they're closing, and they're putting some of the people who cannot go back home into non-congregate. So that's why we want to make sure that we cover both situations. And then we're going to talk about the different things that will help you accomplish your feeding tasks. Once we do that, and Lisa talks about her personal experiences, we'll open it up to the questions and the tips from the people on this call. Next page, please.
Anna, could you tell us what is DRO?
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's the disaster response operation. So it's gray skies. It's when something happens. If there's a big hurricane or a tornado or a wildfire, that's gray skies. That's the event. Blue skies events are house fires, family dwelling unit fires. And so there's a distinction between gray skies and blue skies. When you're deployed, especially if it's a level 4, 5, et cetera, those are the bigger events. And that's the kind of event that we really would like to encourage you to get experience on. That's a gray skies event, and usually it's a lot larger. The distinction at the different tiers is based on how much money it costs to support the effort. So I'm going to have you now um, have Lisa come on and just talk about her background, and then later on we'll get her input on the topics that we cover. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Baker. I'm from the Motherlode, the Gold Country. I am volunteer partner to Rebecca Mitch and co-lead with Mary Prather. I have 11 gaps, SVs and feeding, sheltering, and DAT manager. And right now I'm basically just working in logistics and feeding.
And then also, Lisa, you were recently deployed in feeding, and which event was that? And what position were you in on that more recent one?
It was the blizzards here in the Motherlode, and I was the feeding lead for the 3 counties.
Okay, so that's a pretty high level position. And what we're really talking about right now for the audience is we want to encourage people who have not ever deployed in feeding to really take that chance and do it, because it's frankly, it's very, very rewarding. Okay, then later on, after we cover the basics, we'll get Lisa's input on what part of the feeding gap training was the most useful, so that you all know, because you're going to need that gap training before you can deploy. And then what was learned that wasn't covered in training. And by the way, before we do that, I want to mention, I had a conversation with someone who was brand new, who had never deployed in feeding before. And I asked him, well, so what is it that you learned? And he said, well, his background was construction. And so his role in his job was always get it done. He's very active. He poured cement, or got cement poured. And what he learned from deploying and feeding was to be more open, communication skills. He actually had to become a different person, as he said it, because he learned that listening to people, listening to clients, really helped them a lot. So, and I just want to say that right now, so I don't forget to say it, because I thought it was quite remarkable that he had that insight. So again, going back to that first page, there's a real interaction that you have with clients when you deploy in feeding. Okay, let's move on to the next page. All right, what I wanted to give you all was a view of what the table of organization looks like on a larger DRO, because if you're deployed in feeding, you're going to be at the shelter or where the clients are. But then there's a structure that happens that you may not have visibility into. And just to give you an idea of who is sitting where and who's making certain decisions that you might, that will affect your life, but you don't really know where they're coming from. So you've got a feeding manager in HQ, and that person is overseeing the feeding, but they report into mass care. So we're all in that umbrella of mass care. And that feeding manager then has an administrator to help do the paperwork. They have a vendor feeding coordinator. And I'm talking about a large DRO, like if it's a level 5 big hurricane, big thing like you see in Texas or Louisiana. And if there is an effort to do community outreach and mobile feeding, there needs to be a manager to help with all the details there. It's quite it's quite an exercise to plan the routes, to get the food and the herbs ready and know where all the meals are going, etc. So that's a big job as well. And then down at the SV level, feeding SV on the left, there could be a feeding a feeding person at the shelter. This is something that would be very useful, but it's only provided if the shelter population count is like 250. And then there's a feeding SA, and this is where we want new people to be deploying, and that's where you're at the shelter and you're helping to get it done. Really important role, because feeding, when you think about it, that is several times a day, and this affects all the people in the shelter. So once they're in the shelter, they have their cot, they're registered. The feeding is something that becomes an effort that takes a lot of time and management, etc. So, and then the mobile feeding on the IRV side, that's only if we do have community outreach. Next page, please.
Anna, could you tell us what is IRV and what is SA or SV?
Yeah, sure. SV is a supervisor, and then SA is that the associate. So if you look in terms of the supervisor is managing an SA, and then the food supervisors all roll up to the feeding manager. So we don't always have that level of tiers. For example, you often have just one person instead of having, both of those levels. But if you have a big enough operation, so for example, I've managed a situation where I had 3 feeding SVs, and each SV had people under them that they managed. But that was when we had, COVID, it was really complicated. And then with IRV is the emergency response vehicle. That is the sprinter that has like a window, like a food truck, and it goes out into the community. In order to be on this food truck, you have to get licensed to be a driver, or you have to have a feeding gap. But it's one of the most fun things to do. You go out into the community. You might be doing where you search and you seek people who need food, so you're driving around, or you might go to a fixed location, like one that we did for the atmospheric floods. We always took it to the Catholic Church, and then the cars would line up. They actually lined up for over a mile. They would come up, drive up, and we would hand them the meals. Plus, they had no potable water, so we would give 4 bottles of water with each meal. So you've got people who need food, but they can stay in their homes. And so then you have a community outreach. But in that TO, these are the roles of kind of what they do. The feeding manager, they manage the feeding team, they order the food, they determine who's going to be help delivering the meals. As you might know, the Red Cross does not produce food. We don't cook food, but we engage with different providers like the Salvation Army, the Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, World Central Kitchen, Mercy Chefs, Off the Grid, other places where we can engage with them and they produce the food. Or we might get the food from restaurants or from caterers. So headquarters would be the area where that determination is done. And we also have to keep in mind that our partners, our nonprofits, can only stay for a period of time. Often it's 2 weeks. And so then we have to make sure that we have a transition team coming in. So there's a continuity in the feeding. And then the roles underneath that feeding manager are the roles that help support that function of planning and getting everything done. Then you've got the feeding SV, the supervisor or the SA at the shelter, and they provide direction on serving the food at the shelter. They also are the resource for safe food handling at the shelter because often you'll need the shelter workers to help distribute and serve the food. So they are the ones to help make sure that we follow food safety guidelines and personal safety guidelines. Then you've also got the same possibility of teams who are doing non-congregate feeding. And then you've got, in addition to the different food safety, temperature control, and all that, you've got to make sure that your car is cleaned up. Everything that you're using is taken care of. And also, you are then the resource for any information that we might need at headquarters. So if there's a restricted meal, someone we just learned that they're allergic to something, we want to make sure all that information is communicated up. So that group were non-congregate. They would pick up the meals from the kitchens, the caterers, the restaurants, wherever we're getting our food, and they communicate with the client to set up the drop-off times, and they deliver the meals to the clients at the different hotels. So next, please. Okay, so now we're looking at images of congregate shelter feeding areas. You've got your snack and beverage table that needs to be in operation within 2 hours of a shelter opening. You've got your cafeteria style serving area. And as you can see, the server is wearing gloves and wearing a hat. You've got to wear a hat or a hairnet. And then the serving area includes where clients go to sit down and eat once they get their food, because they're not allowed to bring that food back to the dormitory. You don't really want to have kind of the mess, the potential for insects, rodents, etc. So they eat in a set area, and then they go back to the dormitory. Next page, please. Now, this is non-congregate feeding, and this could be in the hotels in a parking lot, sort of fixed site feeding. So we deliver a hot meal to clients who are staying in a motel, a hotel. There was one where I was managing the feeding for Florida, and these clients from Idalia, yeah, they were in a hotel for over a year, and then there were 4 feeding people on the ground in Florida that I had to manage, who would pick up the food every day at lunchtime, and then also go back and pick up different items for their dinner and deliver them to the clients. So that went on for over a year. They didn't use an herb, they used passenger vehicles, right? And then water and sometimes snacks are delivered with those meals, especially if they've got kids, because kids need to eat more frequently. So a little bag, a plastic little baggie with snacks is really a welcome addition. Okay, next page. Okay, here's the meat for you guys. Kind of an eye chart, but wanted to make sure that you could your life would look like, your daily schedule. This is the topic of this session, a day in the life of, and it's here side by side so you can see how similar they are and then also the differences. Because one thing that we mentioned earlier is you might start out in a shelter, but then the shelters close or they consolidate, and some of the clients have to go into non-congregate, so you are then needed to feed them in the non-congregate world. So wanted to make sure that you all see what those similarities and differences are. So when you start out in the congregate shelter, you're going to check in, continental breakfast with the shelter team, clean them out. Now keep in mind, someone needs to start that coffee pot at 6 in the morning if the coffee is going to be ready at 7. So hopefully their night staff will do that, right? And then if in the non-congregate shelter, well, you're going to pick up your information so you know what where you're getting your food for that day, your lunch and dinner, instructions, any other things that are going to be useful for that day. And make sure you have supplies, because your car becomes your sort of your kitchen in a sense. You've got to have cleaning supplies and gloves and trash bags and all that kind of, in the plastic bags, whatever you need to efficiently and in a very safe way carry that food. You've got to have your own thermometer. Now, for the exercise in Florida, every day when they picked up the food, the feeding essays would take a picture of the temperature of that food when they picked it up at the restaurant, and a picture of what was being served. And those were uploaded. So we always had documentation that we were under safe conditions. The next item you're going to have, and this has a red asterisk because it depends on the feeding manager, but I always like to have a quick check-in with my feeding team so that we can talk about anything that's happening that day that they might have a question about, or if there's something for them to be aware of. And then you've got in blue, you can see you've got your daily DRO operations briefing. This is a briefing that everyone who's on the DRO attends. So you've got logistics and you've got sheltering and every kind of function, but it's everybody all together so that any announcements made by senior management can be made known to everyone. And that happens daily. And then you go into your tasks at the 9 o'clock, 10:30, et cetera. So depending on whether you're in the shelter or if you're doing non-congregate, you're doing a few different things, but you're getting ready. And the other point you want to do is if you're in the shelter and you've got a feeding partner like the Salvation Army, check in with them, get to know them. You know, your relationship with them and having a positive relationship with them will really come back in a way that will be supportive for both you and your feeding partner. They are not like a servant, they're a partner. So make sure that you get to know them and that you have a good relationship with them and also with your clients, because as I mentioned earlier, it's very, very, it's rewarding to talk to people, and they like having someone who will listen to their story. Okay, then you're going to go into lunchtime. So you want to set up and serve lunch, clean up, etc. So this is what happens in the shelter. On non-congregate, you're going to be delivering the lunches. Make sure you update the information so we know how many to order for the next day. The following item in the afternoon, you're going to set up and serve dinner in the shelter and clean up. Same thing, dinner for the non-congregate. End of the day, there's a daily DRO debrief, and what they'll talk about are things that happened that day that might be of interest to the whole team. They'll let you know if something big is happening for the next day. It's really a great way to cross-pollinate information. And then make sure that all the reports, the counts, the orders, etc., are submitted. So if anyone has questions about this, this is really your day in the life of, please hold on, and then we will take your questions at the end. Next page, please. All right, here's your feeding task list, and this is just a high level so that you have in mind, and this applies to both congregate and non-congregate feeding. Make sure you wash your hands before you put on your gloves or hats or hairnets. This is really important. And I think there's going to be another session that goes very much more deeply into personal safety and safe food handling. But make sure you practice food safety temperature monitoring, no more than 4 hours between 41 and 135. If you deploy in feeding, I highly suggest you go out and get your own digital thermometer. They're not expensive, they're small. It's really convenient to have one. Now, the ones that we have in our Red Cross feeding kits, often the older ones are analog, and frankly, they're really hard to read. I can't see the little print. So my preference is to have a digital. It's quick, it's easy, and I know where it is if I bring it with me. Make sure you count your plates or your clamshells when you start, and then you subtract the remaining, what you have remaining, to determine the count for meals served. It's totally impossible to try to figure out how many you served if you don't do it this way. But if you do it this way, there's no problem. It's very easy. And then if you have to replenish your plates, make sure you know how many you've added. The counts are very important. They're going to be asked for. So it's critical that you have a handle on how to provide the count. You want to inform your shelter clients not to self-serve, that they're going to be served. And of course, we do that to make sure that we keep food handling safety in mind and there's no cross-contamination, etc. When you serve, use your appropriate serving utensils. Use the spoodles because that gives you volume control, portion control. If you get if you've ordered food for 200 people and you look at a tray, aluminum tray, it's hard to know how much to dish out so you have enough for 200 servings. But if you use your spoodles, these are measured. So you will be able to get the number that you need. And if somebody really wants double helpings of stew, then, you can tell them, when we're done, if we have leftovers, of course, glad to have you come back for seconds. Make sure your dietary restricted meals are delivered to the client in need. And this is for both the in-shelter and non-congregate. It's really hard to control that if it's out there in display. So hold it back and make sure it's delivered to the client who needs that, because some people are highly allergic to a particular item like peanuts or onions, whatever. And it's really important that person gets the meal, the special meal that will allow them to stay healthy. Make sure you label food requiring refrigeration with the date, temperature, and time. I like to bring with me, in addition to my own digital thermometer, I like to bring a fat Sharpie that's got a lot of ink in it still. And then make sure you keep all feeding areas clean and frequently disinfected. So it can get, in a busy shelter, it can get kind of snarly, ugly. And so you want to really take care of that, removing the garbage and wiping down the tables. And in the appendix, we have the different products that could be used for cleaning. And then also, if you end up having norovirus in your shelter, you've got to use a different set of products. And so those are in the appendix if you're curious and want to get a better idea of cleaning products. Next page, please. Okay, real important. Clients have been, they're under a lot of pressure, anxiety, they've been displaced. It's very easy for them to get anxious again. And when they know when they're going to be fed, what time the meals are, it actually is comforting, so that if there's going to be a change, and I've had the situation where the lunches were delayed because there was a road closure, but if you publicize it, they actually know what's happening and they don't worry so much. So publicizing the meal times, if you're in a non-congregate, that's via text message to your clients that you're serving. It really helps them feel safer. And then the other thing we have on this page is that big old coffee pot in a shelter. You look at that, a lot of people don't know what a PERC coffee pot does anymore because we've got so many of those Keurigs, etc. But you look at that big sucker, and how do you know how to perk the coffee to make sure that you put the right amount of water and coffee grounds in? There's your recipe right there. It's 1.5 to 1.75 cups, the grounds for 40 cups of that coffee maker. And keep in mind, it takes 42 minutes to brew. So real important that it starts early enough. Okay, and then also, if you know that you have clientele that's largely Hispanic or different, they speak a different language, publicizing that information in language for them is also a really, really nice gesture. Okay, next page, please. daily reporting. So you will need to provide reporting. It will be Skya, WebEOC. Those are the tools that we use now. And it might be that the shelter manager is going to be inputting the reporting, but just be aware that those counts that we talked about earlier, meal counts, are going to be needed, and they will be delivered Skya and WebEOC. And then this information is used to make sure that our feeding vendors know how many orders that we need. We also add in orders. It might be that we would need orders for if you see that there are people in the community that come by for food, because now if someone calls 1-800 Red Cross and say that they can sleep in their homes, but they need food because their entire pantry is out and they have no power. The agents who answer the phone are directed to send them to the shelter to get food. So if they're within the area, the footprint of the DR, then that's where they will be sent to go. So it's really important that headquarters and other people know that you're seeing people show up for food. Okay, next page, please. Okay, now Lisa will talk about her input on what we just covered, and then we will take questions, and also we'd love to hear any tips from people who have deployed and want to just give that special hint or information or guidance for someone who's going to deploy for the first time. Go ahead, Lisa.
It said, what part of the feeding gap training was the most useful to you for the feeding role? Excuse me, food safety and personal safety protocols, I think, were really what I thought was the most important to me. And bringing your own thermometer, because I've been places where we would ask for them and we would never get them. What did you learn on deployment that was not covered in the training? I was actually in Pasadena with a woman that done feeding forever, and we were at the Bob Hope Center, and she told me to go sit down with the clients instead of sitting next to her, and just getting the personal contact with the clients and hearing their stories was wonderful. And learning about their cultural and dietary needs is another one, because the people are used to eating this way. I had one lady that it was early in the morning and she wanted hot sauce, and I'm going, okay, what does she want hot sauce for? She was eating a cup of soup and she needed hot sauce. So that's my personal comment on this. Anna, are you there?
Yeah. So that's really good. Okay, so hot sauce.
Hot sauce.
Where did you get the hot sauce from?
We went, and with a MCPC card, we went to a store and made sure we had hot sauce for the clients. It was in the Watsonville when we had the atmospheric rivers, and the population was predominantly Hispanic. So you have to get them what they're used to, and it makes them feel more comfortable, because
Yep.
eating is something that gives you comfort in the time of stress.
Well, that's a really good one. And it's actually true that in that area, because I was doing the mobile feeding there, and for every meal we had tortillas, tortillas, we had rice and beans most of the time. Yeah, right. And so that is really important, right? So, but some of it's hard. I did hear that it was difficult for the people who were supporting the evacuees in Alaska, because it was just stuff we didn't know how to get. So, but really important to try to adapt to what people are comfortable eating. And again, it goes to comfort. You know, they're under stress, they've been displaced, and just having that, knowing that there's a consideration that we care, and then trying to accommodate that is a really, really good thing to do. But before we go to the actual questions and answers, if there are any. Please put questions in chat and we'll go to them. But anyway, if you can just flip to the appendix, we can show people what we have in there. So this getting and serving the food, this is here so that you understand or have a view into where, if you deployed, you'd be actually at this very bottom, a bigger DRO, a bigger event. So in the smaller ones, we definitely would expect that, you know, these would be in your own area. And so, of course, you might be called upon to support feeding, sheltering, et cetera. It's really a wear many hats kind of world there. And then with the middle, level 3, level 4, you might have regional coming in to support you, but your feeding partner, and you might have a feeding partner, because in the first one with the few count, the lower count, the feeding partners often will not activate, right? But then when you have a higher count in your shelters, then you do have a likelihood of having a feeding partner. But we also have more of a partnership with their volunteers as well, because that they usually come in with volunteers to help serve. But the larger one, that one on the pink, that's a true deployment where you're going out to support a larger effort. And this is where you get that big experience with feeding. Next page, please. Okay, so when you have a high population congregate shelter, you could have, like, the first time I ever did feeding in a shelter, there were over 600 people in the shelter overnight, first night, which is a lot. So if they're coming up to the cafeteria style service so that they can get their dinner, you're going to have a mass crowd that's not very workable. So if you want to reduce congestion, you know, have them come up in groups or find a way to bring them in, and so you don't have chaos, right? You can also post what's being served, and you can consider using another language if you have a Hispanic people, etc. So then they know that this is what this, because sometimes they look at it and they don't know what it is. Then you don't have to sit there and explain it, because that helps the line move a little bit quicker. Or if there's a choice, then that is communicated with what's displayed in your post. You can also have a person, you know, people are in line, have that hand sanitizer and just walk through that line, offer it to people as they come up. It's another way for you to be talking to people while they're waiting in line. And then have Red Cross and or event-based volunteers, that's what EBVs are, to help at meal times. So they can help serve if, in fact, you're really pressed for having enough manpower to get that food out. And then save a few meals for clients who miss the meal time or for the night shift. But if you do that, take that food out early and label it and put it in a refrigerator right away, instead of waiting until the end of the whole service. Okay, next. And this is what we talked about earlier. If you, you know, you should be cleaning up and disinfecting tables and making sure everything is pleasant and sanitary. So these products on the left are the standard ones that you see, especially these Clorox wipes. The Cavicide is really for cot cleaning. But if you find that you've got a shelter with norovirus, get the stuff on the right. This is stronger. You know, it will kill the norovirus. But if you're going to use these products, wear gloves, wear a mask, and keep in mind, dwell time is what's needed to kill bacteria. It's how long the stuff has to stay on the surface. And by the way, norovirus is not uncommon. So, and actually, it happens on a lot of cruise lines as well. So when you get a bunch of people together, they can get sick. And the thing with norovirus is it's highly contagious. It gets everywhere. So, when you make sure to attend the session that's on safety. And the safety is not just safety for your clients, but it's personal safety for you as well. So that's why we wanted to include these slides in the appendix. Okay, let's go to questions and answers. See if we have any questions.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Lisa. The food safety one we just had last week, so we recommend you to refer to that. We'll go through the Q&A first, then we'll go to hands raised. Anna, could you tell us the difference again? What is congregate shelter versus non-congregate shelter?
Oh, yeah. Let's go back to that page where we go to day in the life of. Okay, go next one. Okay. Congregate shelters are where people are staying together, like in a gym or community center. They're all staying in one large room or a set of rooms. Multiple cots set up. If you've done sheltering as one of your gaps where you learn to set up a cot. Non-congregate is where we put them up in a hotel. So you might have 4 people in a hotel room, like it's 2 adults and 2 children. They don't go more than that, but they're staying in a hotel. So the hotels that we try to use are ones where breakfast is provided by the facility. So then they can go in and they can get either continental breakfast, or sometimes these places have hot breakfast. They have like scrambled eggs, etc. And so we serve lunch and dinner. We deliver lunch and dinner. We don't provide breakfast unless if the facility does not provide a breakfast, then we might deliver them in a bag with the dinner, like a fruit cup, milk packed in a shelf-stable container, cereal. So it's cold breakfast. Often they'll have a little refrigerator. And so then we can also include things like hard-boiled eggs and yogurt, etc. But we don't deliver breakfast. Whereas in the shelter, some of our feeding partners do provide breakfast, hot breakfast, and some of them don't. If they don't provide hot breakfast, we serve continental breakfast in the shelter. Like, again, the yogurts, the protein bars, breakfast bars, oatmeal that you add water to and you can make it hot, stuff like that. So basically, congregate shelters is like being in a gym. Non-congregate, you're in a hotel. Next question.
Thank you, Anna. And just to emphasize, the continental breakfast is the minimum standards, and the ideal standards are hot breakfast, whether you're in congregate shelter or non-congregate shelter. Okay, next question. Is there any special clothes to wear for feeding operations? Do you need to wear aprons? Do you need to wear comfortable shoes?
Well, you absolutely have to have closed-toe shoes. I mean, you don't, in a shelter, I would think you'd have to, you're not going to wear thongs ever in a shelter. I mean, that's just too dangerous, but you should have closed-toe shoes. It's been said that it would be really good if you had an apron. You might, get stuff on you, but the only things that you really have to wear is you have to wear a hat or a hairnet. And they also have beard nets, but I've never really seen one. And of course, you must wear the gloves, right? But you got to wash your hands first.
Thank you. And if you need to order supplies, you can, submit the request to a supervisor and have them to go through logistics to all the supplies for you, including thermometers, digital thermometers. Okay. Are feeding managers also volunteers?
Yes. Yeah. Just about everybody's a volunteer. Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you. And they can also be paid staff, but most of our workforce are volunteer based. There are several tips in the Q&A that we mentioned earlier that you'll see that 42 cups of coffee that takes 42 minutes to brew. So one of the recommendation is make sure that you leave enough time to brew the coffee. Otherwise, the clients might be anxious for getting coffee.
They'll be
Um,
cranky.
Next one, how are people accounted for or registered that they're just coming for food and they're not staying at the shelter?
That's a real tricky one. It's not, I don't think there's a process. But if I look at like the dashboard, the BI dashboard for the types of things people ask for in a Gray Skies event, food is like the third one down. The first one is they want financial assistance. The second one, they might need sheltering, short term or long term. And food assistance is actually pretty high. But right now, there is no way that I'm aware of that we track it other than the fact that it's an order that we know that we need to provide. Like if you see people coming every day, they've got an extra 10 people or extra 10 meals, then that's going to be in the order and in the count. But there's not a way to easily say, well, these are the people in the shelter versus people who just came up. Because frankly, it's a new process that they're sent to the shelter to get food.
Thank you so much. And so we do not track people. I mean, I shouldn't say we do not track people. We do not register people on Skya on the shelter client intake form
Correct.
for them. However, the shelter team need to track them so then the feeding team knows how much to order. And
Yep.
another thing will be important to discuss with the clients and talking with the clients is where are they staying? If they're not staying at the shelter, where are they staying? What additional resources can we provide them or do they need? Okay, next one. If the shelter clients are really, really hungry or they're, heavy sized, can they get extra meals? And if they can get extra meals, how about hotel clients?
Um, the snack table is open with a lot of stuff. There's often a wide choice, including fruit. There's like the what's it called? Where you open the package, there's all these nuts and things in it. So those are things they can have. If they're really hungry, if there's leftover food, of course they can come in for seconds but we don't have a way of ordering two meals for someone. In the hotel, what what some of these people did in the Florida one that I mentioned earlier, they actually went and took things like extra pancakes and things or sweet rolls, etc., to their room and fruit, bananas and oranges, etc., to their room to have as extra snacks. So we don't have a way of ordering more, but I don't know that people are necessarily going away hungry.
Anna, don't we usually have extra, or don't we usually order extra food, especially in the beginning?
Yep,
Yes. So
we do.
to answer that question, I would say we don't want any clients to go hungry. And if we have a person who is used to a higher calorie intake, we will accommodate that individual.
So what I'm hearing is, yes, we do accommodate second rounds. They are more than welcome to come to us to let us know. Two, what I'm also hearing is that it requires a collaboration with the sheltering team, whether it's the non-congregate shelter or the congregate shelter, or even, at the non-congregate shelter that sometimes we're SRT team, the shelter resident transition team, to know the clients that, when you have a population that requires more calories or more food intake or dietary restrictions or dietary preferences, we strive to meet that requirement, and that requires us to pivot and to know the requirements in advance, so then we can pivot, and that requires coordination, collaboration to let us know ahead of time. Okay, so we talked about this earlier for the hairnets and gloves, etc. All of those will be provided by the Red Cross, and if we're short for anything, you can always request your supervisors to go ahead and order that. The next question is on availabilities, and I'll take that. If your top first three gaps are not feeding, you can still get deployed in feeding. You just need to, once there's an opportunity comes up, you need to, one, update your volunteer connection for availabilities so people know to call you. Two is that if you want to adjust your gaps in any ways possible, you can also go ahead and adjust that. Let's see, 1 second.
Oh, quick one, Ewei.
Yes.
With regard to what's required, it's very useful to bring a baseball cap with you anyway. It could be sunny. It could, and that's what you can wear, as your hat. So it's something that if you deploy, not only would you use it for feeding, but you might use it because you're outside, right? If it's raining, you might want it, or if it's really sunny, bring a cap.
Let me
Thank you.
let me
Sorry,
just
go ahead, Mary.
that's okay. Let me just caution or put a caveat with that. Be careful about what your hat says.
Yeah.
It could, some things could be offensive to people. We don't really want to wear a hat that says Guinness on it, even though yesterday was St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
want to be a little conscientious about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Okay, thank you. So the next question. So the slide we're currently on, the breakfast time, lunchtime, dinner time, those are sample schedules. Those, we can change that, accommodate that according to our client schedule. So the question is, if they have to work early or they have to work later or go to school or whatnot, can they take the food to go?
Yes and no. So some of that food doesn't get delivered until, and we do accommodate those different kinds of schedules. So, for example, we did have people staying at the shelter who left early to go work, and so we then provided ways for them to have a bag lunch. But again, knowing who you're dealing with, and that'll allow a way for you to try to accommodate them. We had workers who definitely had to leave early in the morning, and we do try to accommodate their needs. And then the other part is if they come in, they're going to be late coming in, they'll miss the dinner time. But if you know that, then you can put aside a portion for them and put it in the refrigerator right away so that it's not within that difficult time frame where it could cause a problem.
Thank you again. It's the communication and collaboration with the sheltering team. Okay, and while we wait for more questions in the Q&A, let's go to the mics. Joan, would you like to come off mic and ask your question?
If you're talking, Joan, you're on mute.
I've allowed your mic, so if you want to press the button to unmute yourself.
Let's come back to her.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Roy, would you like to come off mute?
Yes, thank you very much. Last year I deployed up to Bend, Oregon for the flooding that they had up there as they ended up calling me a team lead. I was an SA at the time, and they had 2 SAs on working the IRV. But just a couple of things, and I'm talking mainly, this is on the IRV side. We had a shelter that we delivered food to. We had a headquarters that we delivered food to. We had a warehouse that we delivered food to, and then we had clients that were in hotels and motels that we delivered food to. And so A couple of things is be flexible. We tried to do the constant delivery, but the same place about the same time, but that didn't. In some cases, like the headquarters, we would always deliver at 11, but once a week they had a Teams meeting at 11 with National. And so we put them till the last delivery instead of the first. And so we used the coordination and communication that you keep talking about.
Yeah.
And then, especially with the herbs, a couple of things that does need two people, but use the downtime to sanitize and gas and do the upkeep on the herb. It's surprising you don't think delivering, in a small town or something, you chews up the gas, but it does when you're running it for, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, you want to